Blami, Titu Atura Renelta Arluk. So hello, my name is Renelta Arluk. I'm Director of Indigenous Arts here in Treaty 7 territory. I come to you from Mohkinstsis, Alberta, and Treaty 7, home of the Stoney Nakoda, Sutton of the Dene, Blackfoot Confederacy, Métis Region 3, and Gathering Nations of Cree and Tanaha. So I'm originally from the Northwest Territories. My mother is Dene Suslane and Cree from Treaty 8 Territory and Wood Buffalo National Park region. And my father's Inuvialuit Gwich'en from the Inuvik region. And so I'm been here in Treaty 7 for about 4 years now. And it's just been a real incredible experience raising my family here, my son and my partner. And I don't come from the mountains. I come from barren land with Canadian Shield. And so it's been something really incredible to experience mountains in the way of altitude, but also gathering and just the incredible welcoming nations living in this area, getting to know everyone. So I'm just really grateful. I'm pretty excited. This is our third session of Decolonizing the Narrative Conversation sessions, and I'm really excited to be learning from and listening from Ursula Johnson, who has she's an incredible performing artist, SOBI award-winning artist, and Decolonizing the Narrative Conversation sessions was inspired by how these incredible Indigenous arts leaders are really shaping art in the Canadian landscape. And I just thought it might be really interesting to have these conversations to learn from how artists are incorporating their discipline, their artistic discipline through this Indigenous perspective and ways of knowing and being. And so Ursula has exhibited work nationally, internationally, since graduating from NASCAD in 2006. Johnson describes her work as changing mediums based on who I am talking to and what conversation I'm trying to have. A major focus of her artistic practice is based in performance and installation. Much of her work employs cooperative didactic intervention and is place-based while incorporating various mediums and often collaboration with others. Ursula has also been collaborating with her spouse, Angela Parsons, under the collaborative duo Ginuk. Johnson and Parsons have created works that explore notions of public versus private within the scope of the interpersonal nature of their relationship and cultural difference and sameness. Johnson has been shortlisted for the Salt Spring National Art Prize in 2015 and the Nova Scotia Masterworks Award in 2016. She's a recipient of the Natashan Foundation Reveal Indigenous Art Award and winner of the 2017 SOBI Art Award. So Johnson's work, Moose Fence, won the 2019 Nova Scotia Masterworks Award. So I'm pretty excited to hear what Ursula is going to be sharing today. So I just welcome you into this virtual space.
Hi, Renata.
Hi, you look beautiful.
You too. Nice to see you.
You too.
So what's going on? Are we just going to chat or is that tomorrow?
We're going to chat tomorrow. Today, I'm going to do some deep listening and deep watching, and I'm pretty excited with everything that you're going to be sharing today.
Okay. So hashtag no pressure.
That's right. Hashtag no pressure. I'm here for you. I'm going to disappear, but I'm going to be listening deeply. So if you need me, I'll pop back in.
Okay.
Great.
Have fun. Thanks so much. Thanks. Well, this is exciting. I'm speaking while sitem. Gwe, the we do it just see so on it in a mig mouth. But you go up mammy and the Lucy Gunamagi, Nigma Habuchija, Bohadlana. Well, Darcy. Bigis Nodiola, Giscook, the Jikineke, Modiola, Internet Dictuk, Bijmitualio, Man Giziagno de Midas no Sabono, Giscook, Villamio, Tantil Lugway. First, it was important for me to introduce myself in my protocol breathing and in my language. And I basically just said who I was, where I come from, and my clans and my families. And so I guess the English translation would be, hello, my name is Ursula Johnson. I am from Eskasoni First Nation, and I'm Mi'kmaq from the traditional district of Unama'ki, and my clans are the clans of the Wood Spirits and the clans of the Mice. And I also acknowledge all of you out there in the internet world for coming to join me in your various territories and your various nations and tribes and clans and different communities to come and join me here today on this little bit of a journey. So thinking about kind of the idea of a journey, I think maybe I'll start with just showing like a little video clip. It's a very short clip, and it's a clip just to kind of like frame it up before I jump right into the clip. The clip is, it basically sums up my entire experience, which was a very complicated experience, but also a very kind of like eye-opening experience. And I'll talk a little bit more about it after the clip. But it was quite a while back when I had traveled. Actually, thinking about traveling, it's kind of weird. I'm just going to be real and just be who I am and talk to you as if you're sitting right across from me. And tomorrow we can engage more. But like this idea of us not traveling, especially as artists and cultural makers, we're constantly traveling all over the place. And normally this conversation would be happening at the Banff Centre, like either like on or beside Sleeping Buffalo Mountain, and in that space that I'm so gracious to have had the opportunity to explore creativity in that dome that is created around that mountain in Banff. And it really, it's kind of a little bit heartbreaking that I can't be there and share space with those people, or that all of you can't be there. But it's at the same time, the interesting thing about, this whole pandemic and not being able to travel and do all of these things is that we're able to engage in participating in panels and conversations and discussions like globally and internationally with people that normally we may not have the opportunities to travel and to meet. So it's really, I feel like it's kind of like, it's a good thing on one part because we're all connecting with each other, but it's very strange when you're connecting through the, the lens of a camera and looking at a monitor all day. But it's also really, it's great to be able to see other people and to hear what they're having to say from all the way on the other side of the world. And just kind of, I won't go too much on a soliloquy, but so in January and February of 2020, which was the period of time when everything was kind of starting to shift and things were a little bit hectic in different parts of the world, not so much in the part of the world where we are here in Turtle Island. But so I had taken part in a residency program called the Kerner Residency in Queen's University in Kingston. And I went there in January and February, and I was really kind of at this place in my practice where I was trying to figure out, okay, what am I doing? What am I trying to say? Where am I going? I kind of felt like I was like a little bit stuck because I had done all of these different projects and hopped on festivals and been all over the place. And then I was like, I just want to slow down and be in one place and just like kind of go through all of my work and see, what am I saying here? What is the common thread? What are my methodologies, my practices, my processes? And so I took the opportunity during that residency to just kind of just lay it all out. And that was the last time that I had traveled and done work prior to the pandemic. Because then just on the heels of that, in March of 2020, just a couple months later, I had traveled to Sydney, Australia with Abaquad and the entire delegation. We went there for the Sydney Biennale, and we were going to take part in this great conversation And in the 24-hour flight it took to get there, I landed at 6:30 in the morning. And I went to my hotel knowing that you can't check in until 2. I said, can I leave my bags? And the woman says, I'm not sure if you know, but the WHO just declared a global pandemic. And I was like, okay, so what exactly does that mean? And what does it entail? And she gave all this information. You have to do this, you have to do this, you have to wear these masks, nobody's going to be in your room and all this stuff. And I was like, okay, great. So then our delegation starts arriving and everybody's like, what is happening? What's going on? What do we do? There was people's flights from Norway, from Africa, from South America. Everybody's flights were getting jammed and canceled and all this craziness was happening. Anyways, it made me think at that point in time of traveling all the way across the other side of the globe, how important it is for us as artists and cultural workers to move with our bodies to different places, to be on site, to look around and to see everything that's happening, to meet the people, to learn about the history, to smell the air. All of that stuff informs our practices that we're working on. And here I am in this space in Mi'kma'ki, in Pictou County, here with the gracious hosts of the Sobe Art Foundation to be able to engage in this conversation with the Banff Centre and all of you other artists from all over the world. I'll move my braid. Thanks for letting me know. So all over the world. And then now here I am trying to figure out, okay, what happens now? How do we continue to work in this space? So that was a long setup. I said I wasn't going to go on soliloquy, but anyways, I was trying to set it up for this video, and I'm going to show you this video now.
Nästa morgon gick du. Eller vi så till jag. Giznaglas jag vi så till jag. Get you to go like that. Nästa morgon gick du.
Is it reverse on our end?
Get you das gå igång. Fast jag måste sam get you så där vi också med det. Vi går då för mål vi går. Got you now. Dan går jag också jag. Vad för mål? Ha? Kan du gå? Get you das gå na. Akka sig alla min gil. Muko tageyo. Page pokolurio, pegis nudio. Rudu onano no nuisira, page mitugudio. Joe legaito, kispesani giskikti. Muto sababa bijaya.
So that video was shot in Lumsden in Scotland. And it was my first international residency program that I took part with the Edinburgh University. And while I was there, it was kind of strange to me because it was part of a craft residency. And I was the only person who wasn't really a craft person. I considered myself like a basketry apprentice, learning from my great grandmother and working with my great aunt and my grandmother and different elders and community members to learn the art of Mi'kmaq basketry, but I wasn't a craft person. And here I was surrounded by like gilded glass workers, tapestry workers, porcelain artists. And I was like, I'm a performance artist. I don't know how I fit into this mix. And so what they did was they took half were Canadian artists and half were artists from the UK that all came together. And I was like the intersection, being from New Scotland, Nova Scotia, being a Mi'kmaq person that was essentially our craft items were the pinnacle of colonial trade between Europe and the New World. And so I was like that missing link, according to the facilitators. And I was like, whoa, that's kind of intense and a lot to put on me. I said, but I'm not really a crafts person, so I'm not sure what I'm doing here. So I spent a lot of time just walking through the landscape and trying to meet some of the locals and chatting with them. And then I saw this livestock, and I was a little bit shocked and kind of learning about the history and everything, because then I went back and I spoke to one of the artists from the UK, and we're having conversations. And I said, I don't really know how I fit. I'm like the only Indigenous identifying person in this group. And, you know, it's kind of complicated for me because the things I talk about in my work is very different than what you all talk about. Your work, not just necessarily the difference between settler and Indigenous, but the craft processes that they were working on was all about how and not necessarily the why. But for me, as a conceptual performance and installation artist, it's all about the why. Like, why am I doing this? Why do I need to do this? And then we figure out how. But for all of them, it's like, how do you perfect this vessel? How do you use this? It didn't really matter why. So I kept asking people. And then I had a conversation with one of the artists and I said, well, for you, it must be really interesting because, you know, as somebody who's Scottish, and she looked at me, she said, I'm not Scottish. And I was like, whoa, okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were Scottish because here we are in Scotland. And she gave me a really great education on about how her people, that her ancestral people, even though she is in Scotland, were actually derived from like tribal groups from the Norse culture, and that they were colonized by the English to create Scotland, and gave me a really rich history about how Scotland is just as colonized as other colonies across the world. And it was the English that had created these spaces. And then I learned about, you know, the estate systems and all these livestock that were there, that, you know, it was basically capitalist kind of consumerism, that nothing lived past the age of 2. And I started thinking, I'm like, wow, so all these cows are only like 2 years old. What happens? They're like, well, then they're shipped to Venezuela, and then they're processed in Venezuela. Then they're sent as like, you know, beef to United States for the McDonald's food chain. And I was like, what? I thought I was in like the land of plenty where it's like local, homegrown, organic, everybody. And then they're like, no, no, no. And then I started to learn about the forests, and the forests in Scotland were all timbers that were planted because everything had been completely burned down in like the past 4,000 years. And I was like, whoa, okay, that's crazy. So it kind of gave me a realization about how it wasn't just brown people that were colonized. So it gave me a really different perspective on the whole idea of colonization and the different conversations that should be happening with different artists. So in kind of thinking about the idea of this land and having the trauma on this land and these animals consuming the trauma, then I talked to one of the other artists who was actually from Canada, and she had moved there a very long time ago. And we were there, and I said, I wonder if there's a song that like there's a song on this land. And so we started talking about how the landscape has been changed throughout these generations. And then I came across a topographical map. And then that was where the birth of the Lansings project had happened. And I'll go through a couple of images we have with the Lansings. I think I have like 4 or 5 images that we'll flip through. But I'm not going to go into, you know, explaining where this image is from or the work or the collaborators. So Lansings, just to give a bit of an idea, is a site-specific and language-specific project that I've been working on for quite a number of years now, since being in Scotland at that point in time in 2013. And to date, there's actually, I think to date there's like 17 songs that we've done, and with various collaborators from all over the place. And if anybody there is, you know, interested in collaborating on a Lansings project, let's talk and let's jive about it, because I feel like this is a project that can just continue over and over. So that it's based on invitation and to collaborate and to work together by entering into a relationship. So it's myself and the artists that I'm working with that enter into this relationship. And then in that relationship, we're trying to invoke a couple of different things. So I always think about, there's like the invite, and then from the invite, there's a visit. So I try to spend some time with my collaborators. But then in the visit, we kind of discuss, well, what is our responsibility to the land, to these notions of stewardship, to how we're working together on, you know, all of these various issues that we're covering within our art practice in different ways. And so with all of these ways of working together, we've come to a place of thinking about an apology and how the land has been in a place now where I, from my perspective and my collaborators' perspectives, we spoke about how the land is due this apology. And so by way of trying to create that apology in order to come to some act of reconciliation, the things that we do with these artists is we actually enter into a durational performance where we sing from anywhere from 3 to 5 hours nonstop and just singing the same song over and over and over. And some of the songs have multiple verses, some are just one, some are vocalables, some have language within them. So they're all different and they vary to different degrees. But the idea of looking at music as the catalyst for sharing that apology was something that was really important to me. And that, looking at the landscape and seeing these topographical maps that show how the land has been cut, mined, extracted from, all of these different things has changed, human impact has changed on that landscape. And so I thought it was really interesting looking at the topography to create a song line and then create these songs. So through this process of having the invitation, having the visit, and then to make an apology in order to come to some type of reconciliation was a model that I felt really fit with this specific project. And in thinking about that project, there was often these really amazing exchanges that happened where it was something that it doesn't happen with any of the other collaborative projects. And I think it's because we're delving so deep into our own relationships and looking at ideas of care and how we meet care, but also really creating this very visceral sensory experience. With these collaborators, we're singing, we're putting all of our energy into it, and we're really exploring sound on a completely different level, where we're exploring the architecture of sound. You can create soundscapes that just totally shift all of the cells in your body. And it's amazing to see what music has done, because music, no matter what language you speak, what cultural background you come from, music is intrinsically a part of that culture. And yes, there's some cultures that say, no, music is not a part of it, but instead those cultures will often have prayer, and those prayers are very musical, where you can see that it's important to have some of that tonality that moves through these different things to push that intention. And so in looking at the idea of this model with the invitation, the visit, the apology, and the reconciliation, I started thinking, well, what are some of the other works that I've done that kind of lead into some of those same touchstones? And the other work that I have is Ulnawultig. And that work there has the exact same touchstones, where there's an invitation to collaborate. But what's happening there is that the idea of care is pushed even a little bit further, because it's a blind invitation. These people don't know me. I just put a call out and then they come and then they say, hey, I'm going to participate in this project. So then it's really important for me as the artist to work with these people with even more care, because not only am I having the same amount of care with the collaborators in the music, but now I'm on these people's bodies. And these people are very vulnerable. They're offering themselves up to me. Often I have very sharp tools that I'm working with. And it's also in public spaces. The majority of these projects that happened were in public spaces because they were interventions. And so that project has been continuing for a very long time. And we've accumulated a number of different intervention projects. But then there came a point when I no longer wanted to have it in the public, because I felt like the conversations we were having together between the sitter and myself were very deep personal conversations. And they weren't conversations for consumption. Because sometimes when you put something in a public space, especially an intervention performance, there's going to be people that are consuming that individual, their thoughts, their ideas that they're trying to communicate with me. And I found it was very problematic. And, you know, in speaking with a lot of the people that I worked with, because the other thing I like to do as far as my process is concerned is, you know, what I would consider to be a debrief, where at the end of these collaborations, we sit down and spend time to talk about what happened, what did we just do, how do you feel, are you okay, like, did this work? So to have all of those debriefs with the Lansings participants and Olnewaltik participants is extremely important to me. And that's information that's for me, and it's never for the public or for me to share what they're saying. And so in looking at that project and changing that project, then I thought, okay, let's do it somewhere that's more private, somewhere where people want to do it personally, some places that may be a place of conflict for them, or maybe even a place of sanctuary. And then so it's led into a completely different trajectory now. And we're working on a solo exhibition actually with the Art Gallery in Nova Scotia. It's going to be a few years out because we have to accumulate so many of these and there's so much care involved in it. But you'll find some of that information coming out in, you know, the upcoming months that you'll hear about it, because then maybe you also, when we're in your region or you're in our region, you may want to take part in this project as well and be one of these sitters. And so looking at that project and kind of the whole idea about working with these various people, care is something that I have very, you know, it's kind of very forward in the ways that I work. And it's something that I take very seriously. And in looking at the idea of caring for these people, and caring for their thoughts, their ideas, their intentions, it brought me to thinking about, you know, the idea of caring for myself. And so in looking at myself as a performance artist, you know, these are two different works where I'm performing with other people and they're putting their bodies and they're sacrificing, you know, their energy and their bodies and putting themselves into these spaces. So I started looking at different performances that I had where I was looking at, okay, what am I doing? How am I putting my body in space? What does my body have to do with the conversations that I'm trying to have? And there was a time, it was actually in 2017, where everything just kind of shifted for me. And the big shift during that period, and it's funny because I've talked to not only Angela, you know, my partner for a long time, but so many different people that I work with, they're like, 2017 was crazy for you. And I was like, yeah, I think it was like really intense because I seem to remember Angela was telling me that she, a CBC article or something had said that I had done 11 exhibitions in 5 provinces in 9 months or something like that. So that's ridiculous as far as like performance art is concerned. And then we think about like, well, people in theater or music, they're like, oh, that's nothing. I've done like 15 shows in the past 4 days. You know, that's a very different model, is a different context, not to say that you know, one is different or more important than the other or anything. It's just a very different way of working. And so in 2017, I was working with all of these different mediums. I was doing performance, did photo shoots, did some video, did all kinds of different projects and stuff like that. And then I got an invitation from Obero in Montreal, actually, to take part in the Viva Biennial Performance Art Festival that takes place in Montreal. And I had heard about Viva, but then it was really important for me to say, okay, well then can I come to Montreal and see this? Like, I don't want to see the festival, obviously, because it's already happened, but I need to see the space. I needed to like be in my body here. I need to hear what's going on there. I need to meet the people. I need to engage in the environment. And so we set up a site visit and I went to the space and it was this big, huge old foundry that is no longer a foundry, but it had the big moving like I-beams where they used to hang the crucible. And I looked up and it had these like these window panels, and I just imagined the reverberation of that foundry and how it would have shook, the entire building. And then hearing a train go by, and I was like, what is there? And then I learned that later it was the merchandise train that came there. And I started looking at the community in the area, and there was, the Francophone community, the Anglophone community, and a lot of immigrant communities all in that same area. So I started thinking, how these communities would be meeting with each other or conflicting with each other. But then once I kind of looked all outside here and thought about the space and everything, then I was like, okay, now I need to like rein that all in here into me, and who am I in this space? So for me, as a Mi'kmaq woman going to Montreal, which is known as Tiohtià:ke in Mohawk territory, it was very complicated. And there was a lot of things that came up for me because, my historical information that I've gotten in as far as Mi'kmaq understanding is that the Iroquois weren't always there. The Iroquois came, and the Mi'kmaq were allied with the French. And so the Mi'kmaq had relationships with the French. The English come into Nova Scotia here. And then when they come, they separated the French and the Mi'kmaq, which created great conflict. There was scalping bounties on Mi'kmaq scalps, on French scalps. The French were trying to settle in Quebec, trying to make settlements there, which is actually like much older, that the towns were there. And the 2017 that was coming up for that project was celebrating Montreal 375, right? And it was also celebrating Canada 150. And it was also during the middle of the testimonials for the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, for the inquiry. So it was all these really heavy subject matters. And I thought, for me as a Mi'kmaq person, to be in what is now Iroquois territory, what would it have been for a Mi'kmaq woman to be in that place 150 years ago? What would it have been to be a Mi'kmaq woman 375 years ago in that space? And I started thinking about travel and moving. And so it kind of led me into this project that really I'm still trying to understand and work through it. It's very fresh in my mind, and it's extremely visceral. And it's a project that has absolutely changed my life and the way that I think about things, the way that I work. And it's also, I was terrified because when I was designing this project, thinking about my body in this space with this environment and trying to create a journey to take people on through time, it was really important to me to look at, well, what can I do to really bring people into that vortex with me that I'm about to enter into? So it was scary because as I was designing the piece, the only thing that kept coming back was that, okay, when I do this, I'm going to have to be naked. And I was terrified. And I was like, no, I can't do this. I'm not one of those performance artists that just throws my clothes off. And so I was like, why do I keep thinking like I have to be in the nude? And I started thinking of all these different things. And then I was like, no, I can't do it with clothes. It's not going to be the same project. And so it was very terrifying to me. Like I said, I'm not the one to just go and throw my clothes off. So that's, I guess, basically my trigger warning to you that there is some nudity in these next few images. And so the performance festival, the way that took place was something that was really, it was very beautiful because Viva, they create a community, they work together, and there's actually a zero consumption policy. And so the idea is that you are there to witness actively. You don't come in with your phone and start clicking and taking pictures and everything, because then you're not present when you're busy doing this with your phone. And so that was like, okay, well then at least I know my naked body's not going to be all over the internet. Well, I guess kind of. But so this image that you see right now, just to kind of frame it up, again, I can't explain the entire project of how the performance worked, but just to kind of touch on some of the things, that basket that I'm holding, I've repaired. So it's an old basket that I got from an antique shop, and I had repaired it in during a seminar that I was working with at master's students at Concordia, and kind of looking at, you know, that Japanese tradition of repairing broken pots with the gold, and, you know, kind of bringing new life to it and celebrating those scars within that basket. So I'm just going to say that, and then I'll show you a couple images of the Viva performance, and then there's going to be a short video clip. And so some of the things that I've been trying to look at with ideas around this particular performance was understanding the history of site. You know, whose land was it? Whose land is it now? Who was there and who is there? What happened there? What was happening there? You know, all of these different things with Canada 150, with Montreal 375, with missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, but also really looking at the idea of celebration, because, you know, those two, the main two things of, you know, the 375 and the 150, there were celebrations of colonialism from two different perspectives and two contexts. And as a Mi'kmaq person, a Mi'kmaq woman in Montreal, here I was trying to do the anti-celebration of colonialism. My braid keeps bumping my microphone. I'll put it over here on this side. I won't wear braids tomorrow. So in looking at this idea, there was a really interesting thing that happened, as I had mentioned, where it changed my life, because I physically trained my body. I went on a very strict diet because I was working with these materials that I had never worked with, because I found out not only was 375 and 150 and the inquiry happening, but it also happened to be at the same time as the World Artistic Gymnastics Championships. And I was like, what a better way than to be an artist trying to do gymnastics? I don't know about that, but I did reference some tools and materials from the gymnastics world. And so I thought, I'll work with these materials. Is my braid bumping? No. And I was looking at Olympic rings, and they were hung from the crucible that I was working with, but I had put together this choreography of like 5 positions that I was working on throughout this entire project. And I really wanted to look at what my body was doing in that space with those people. And the people were the projection screens. The next image. Oh, it's the videos next. Okay, sorry. Kevin, who is amazing, who's helping me out here, tells me that the video's next. So I'm just going to stop talking, and I'm going to play you the little clip of the video. Or Kevin's going to play it. So the fiddle reel that you heard was called Constitution Breakdown. That was composed by the late, great Lee Cremo, who is Mi'kmaq from Cape Breton. And it was really important to me to have that music, because he created that piece when he was invited to come to Expo 67 in Montreal. And it felt really important to situate Mi'kmaq people in that space. But all of the witnesses that are there are wearing these biohazard suits because I wanted them and their bodies to be a part of this immersive environment. So they became the projection screens. But then it was also this idea of, sterility and like containing something that may be contaminant. And is the contaminant my Indigenous female body in the space in the period that we're doing this national inquiry? Or was the contaminant them upon my Indigenous female body? So it was all these really, kind of complicated layers that I was kind of working through and trying to explore, what is happening in that space and what's going on there. And so it was really, it was something that, like I said, changed my life forever. And there's something that often happens in durational performance work when it's really intense is there's a lot of injuries that take place. And I had quite a few injuries that I had sustained in this project, even though I had said I had trained, I had really kind of worked really hard to get my body so that I would minimize the amount of injuries. But some of those injuries were actually a number of broken blood vessels that I'm going to show you here. You see that? Can you go to full screen there quickly there, Kevin? So that's not the broken blood vessels, obviously, because that was 2017, but I tattooed the broken blood vessels. And the reason that I had them tattooed on my arm was because I wanted to remember how important it was to take the same type of care that I took in that project for other projects moving forward. And so I think, is there one more of the Viva? Yes, so there's the projection screens. You can see the people as projection screen. And then it kind of brought me to this whole other place of looking at, well, what am I doing next? What's happening? What's going on? And to kind of like wrap it back around, because we're getting close to the end of our time here. Here I am, hosted by the Sobe Art Foundation to help me make this video production happen here with all of you. And I was in Banff in 2017, just after winning the Sobe Art Award. And when I arrived to Banff, I was like, oh my God, I have money to make art. And I'm at the Banff Centre, and how great to be able to make something amazing with these beautiful people and tools and technologies at the Banff Centre for the Arts. There I am getting a tattoo. And so when I arrived to Banff, I was like, hey, I have an idea. So I did this project years ago called the Indian Truck House of High Art, where I was a peddler on the streets, 1800s and all this stuff. And then I thought, wouldn't it be great to like modernize this idea of the 1800s peddler and to do something where it's kind of like a bit of a flashback of time where we are in all of a sudden the world of television and having the beautiful nails done with the infomercial hosts or the shopping network hosts. I thought, instead of taking a peddler, what if we have a host of a shopping network that's selling the same items, but in a completely different context with these different worlds? Not somebody from the 1800s who only speaks Mi'kmaq, but now somebody who's in a more modern space. And so I have a little video clip that's a few minutes long. So sit back, get comfortable, and I hope you enjoy the video. It's just a little segment of the longer production that I made while at the Banff Centre for the Arts. And it was beyond my wildest dreams to be able to, take the opportunity to work there and then to have the funds available as an artist to create these high quality productions with the Banff Centre. So we'll show you this video.
Oh my God, those were beautiful.
There's so many different animals to choose from.
I don't think I can pick just one.
A part of the reason why we have the Power Animal shirts that has so many different animals is, sometimes people just can't decide, right?
Yeah, there are too many incredible animals out there, which
Absolutely.
really speak to my spirit.
Yes.
So
Well, I am so grateful for your spirit, Joan of Art, that has come and joined us here today at the Indian Truck House.
you're welcome. I'm
You are
happy to be
always
here.
welcome.
Anytime.
Anytime. We'll see you later. Now, let's move on to our next products. For those of you that are just joining us right now, welcome back. It has been a fabulous day so far, Debbie.
Absolutely.
We have sold so many amazing things.
And we have had such wonderful guests come with us to help
Absolutely.
us.
We love hearing the testimonials from people that take pride in some of the things we
Absolutely.
have here at
We've
the
had
Indian
some
Truck
longtime,
House.
very loyal customers. I hope we'll hear from one
Such
of you today.
loyalty. One thing that I'm really excited about today
Oh,
is
yes.
this beautiful wooden framed classic web animal dream catcher.
Let's take a closer look. Heidi, this is a truly beautiful item. I don't think we've had anything like this here before.
It is just so gorgeous. I mean, like looking at the web structuring here and this beautiful relief sculpture.
Absolutely.
All
This
of
eagle
these
is
feathers.
so important.
It is so important. It just like helps to carry your dreams. In Native American mythology, you put it in your window and the dreams get caught in there.
Oh,
Pass
yes,
through,
that's
the eagle
beautiful.
carries them, but the nightmares, they get trapped in those webs.
And
you
this
know?
web
and
is
then the
so
sun
strong,
rises and
catch
it
every
perishes,
nightmare.
just perishes those nightmares.
Well, and I know our viewers want that. When you have friends visiting, when you have family visiting, staying in your guest room, staying in your bedroom, this is the item that you want to keep them safe.
We have so many different types. We have brand new ones here that not only bring the spirit of the prairies and the plains, but they combine it with the spirit of the skies, with the eagle and the buffalo here together.
You are both grounded, but your spirit is free.
Absolutely.
Now, Heidi, how much can we send this to our viewers for today?
That is a great question. The spirit of the eagle. Isn't it great? So much fun. I love that project. It was fun in all ways. And so I wanted to keep the fun going. So I worked with Central Art Garage in Ottawa, where we created a fully immersive installation. I was like, okay, I have these 2 videos I made in Banff, but because it's in Ottawa and we have Spark Street up around the corner, we need to bling the art gallery out and make a tourism kitschy store. And so that store actually ended up being like kind of the push into moving to what's going to happen next. Because here you are walking into this space where you have, oh, and actually just kind of like a quick little blurb here. So when I'm creating these spaces, these environmental kind of immersive environment spaces, it's really important to me. And this is something I don't tell, so it's a secret, don't tell anybody. But it's something I put in my design of those spaces. I create what I refer to as a safe zone. And the safe zone, nobody knows there's a safe zone, well, except for all of you now, that there's a safe zone there. But that safe zone is not marked out in any way. Nobody knows where it is. It's just when I'm designing, I'm like, okay, this is the safe zone. This is the safe zone. So the idea is that whenever somebody comes into that space, they're implicated and participate in the performance unless they find the safe zone on their own. And sometimes in these performances, everybody finds the safe zone. They're all huddled in it because they're trying to get away. They're like, no, I don't want to do it. But the Indian Truck House of High Art was the first time there was no safe zone. As soon as you walked in, the shopkeeper's bell rang. It's like ding dong, ding dong. You walk in, you enter, there's like drum and flute music playing, just like you're in a tourism shop, just all this kitsch from floor to ceiling. And then the shopkeeper comes out and it's like, hi, welcome to the Indian Truck House of High Art retail store. Danny and Bridget, you're amazing. I love that you guys played along in that project. So driving home, I thought, where does this project go next? And I thought, what better place to do it than to transport people, not from sitting at their televisions watching the Indian Truck House of High Art shopping network, but who is on the other side of that television? Who is watching the Indian Truck House of High Art? Who is buying the stuff from there and donning their homes? So it kind of took me into like a bit of a time warp of exploring, well, who's buying it? Why are they buying it? Where did they come from? What is their lives? What is the narrative around all of this? And like, let's meet them already. But I'm not going to go into that. I'm not going to tell you a whole bunch about it, because what happened now is the Indian Truck House of Hire, The Living Room. And it's an installation at the Blue Building Gallery in Halifax. It's the first time I've had a solo exhibition in Nova Scotia since 2014. So I had my emerging show at St. Mary's University Art Gallery. And then from that show, I just traveled everywhere. And people are like, when can we see your work? And I was like, it will come home some point. And so the pandemic has brought to a place where I couldn't travel, couldn't go anywhere. And I was like, oh, I know what I want to do. And I know the perfect place for it. So a big shout out to Emily Falenke with the Blue Building Gallery. I'm going to show you a couple of sneak peeks for what's in that space. But I'm not going to talk a whole lot about it because actually I'm just going to give a shameless plug. And I'm sorry, Renalta, I didn't ask if I could do this, but I'm going to have an artist talk for the Blue Building to talk about Indian Truck House of Hire Living Room. And I think that's tentatively scheduled right now about August 8th. So stay tuned on social media channels for at Ursula_Johnson or for at TBB, the Blue Building Gallery. And we'll give you some information on how to join the talk that talks about the Indian Truck House of Hire, The Living Room. But here's a couple of images to give you a bit of a sneak peek on what's in there. So thank you so much for everything. And I am so honored to have been able to take part. And I also really want to say thanks to Kent Monkman. And right here we have a study for Mischief's Wet Dream that has been the backdrop, and how amazing of a backdrop to have for a conversation about decolonizing the narrative. So thank you so much, Kent, for allowing us to have this space. And I also really want to say thank you to Kevin for helping us out here. Thank you so much to Angela for always just getting me through all of the stuff, and to everybody here with the Sobe Art Foundation, and to you guys at the Banff Centre. Renalta, you're amazing. I can't wait for our chat tomorrow.
Me too. That was incredible, Ursula. That was incredible. Oh, I gotta. I'm unmuted.
You're unmuted.
I got a pop up. Yeah, that was. I'm very excited for tomorrow, and everyone. So tomorrow, there's questions that have been put into the chat, which I'm really grateful for. We'll keep track of them, and your questions will come forward. It'll be engaging and insightful, and we'll get to dig in a little bit more into the work that you've shown, and also what you're, of course, talking forward about the work that you're doing and how we can engage with that too. Really powerful. So thank you to everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow.
We'll see you tomorrow. Same time. Don't miss it.
Yeah, so I just want to say thank you to the Slate Foundation and to RBC and to Banff Centre for the support to support these Decolonizing the Narrative conversation sessions. So that's me. That's me.
See ya.
Take care, Ursula.
Renalta. Renalta.
Yes,
Are you still here?
I'm still here. I'm still here.
Can everybody hear us, or are they all gone?
Renalta, or
There's
no?
19 people left. There's 19.
Okay.
Hi, Renalta.
Do they
I don't
hear
think
us?
we've met.
No,
I'm
I don't
delivering
think-
nachos to Ursula that were
This is
prepared.
Angela.
Nice to meet
Hi.
you. Beautiful.
So nice to meet you. I don't know where to look. Oh, there we go.
Look at the camera. Look
Okay.
there.
I want to actually see you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Your earrings are beautiful.
Oh, these are Tanya Larson.
Oh,
I know.
fancy.
I know that little moose hide tufting in there too.
I'll show off my Matthew Nakinya.
Oh,
Look at that.
Fire.
I didn't know he did rings.
Oh yeah.
Gorgeous.
Gonna take it to the camera. Take it right to the camera there. Whoa.
Beautiful.
Almost got a nacho butt.
I almost butted
Look
the
at that.
nachos.
Gorgeous.
So we connected on Instagram, and he actually sent me a beautiful video of that actual ring on fire. That where he actually lit it on fire because it's called kulu.
It's called a oh my god, I keep getting kisses mixed up. A kulik.
Kulik.
Yeah.
Kulik. So he actually put it on. He actually had a video.
They're saying in the chat.
Yeah, we're still
We
live.
can
People
still
are
hear you.
just
That's
watching.
great. I love it.
Okay.
I love it.
Hi everybody.
Hi everyone.
Huge shout out to all the amazing First Peoples artists killing it out there. That's my settler. Hello. Now that I know they're public.
Mom
watched
thing.
you.
My mom feel her mom.
We love you. Guess
Angela's gonna kick us out now, so we'll see
Okay.
each other tomorrow.
We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Angela and Janine as well. Hello, Ursula.
Hi, Renalda.
How are you today?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm coming to you from Treaty 7 territory in McKinses, Alberta, home of the Stoney Nakoda, the Sutana, Stoney Nakoda, Sutana of the Dene, Blackfoot Confederacy, Métis Region 3, and traveling nations of, or gathering nations of Cree and Tanaha. And so where are you coming from?
I'm coming to you from Mi'kmaq, the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq. We like to keep the Eastern Seaboard to ourselves, but we do share with the Wolastoqiyik and a couple other folks too, Passamaquoddy, Penobscot, Abenaki, but in Nova Scotia it's just Mi'kmaq.
Just the meme.
Yeah.
It was kind of beautiful to hear you talking about your work yesterday and just like such a land-based practice that you have. Just thinking about when you were spending time in Scotland and really understanding and getting to know the history of the lands there and the trees and the animals as well. Like the video that you shared of the cows, I thought was pretty incredible.
Yeah, it was a trip, man. It was crazy. It was I don't think I've ever seen so much livestock in my life. Like it was as far as the eye can see, just rolling hills everywhere. And it was really I always appreciate and really enjoy traveling to different places, to different territories, and getting to know the not just the people of the territory, but the historical context as far back as I can find information, because I find that really helps to situate me where I am. One of the really amazing things that I was able to take part in while we were in Scotland actually was that we were able to tour around and visit some of the Pictish standing stones. And that was really like spectacular.
Incredible. And when were you there?
Oh, you're going to try to get me to use my memory now. I think it was in October because it was cold and wet and rainy and foggy. And I think it was 2013 actually.
Yeah, I went to Edinburgh for the first time a couple of years ago for the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, and we went as a big theater collective. And I wasn't aware, but there is an indigenous nations that live in Scotland because of the Hudson's Bay.
Okay, so like North American Indigenous relations.
That's right.
Oh, wow.
So there was always, because Hudson's Bay only hired men, and then they would, the men would come to Canada, and then, the Métis and all these nations were born. But I didn't know this, but some of the women would go back with them to Scotland. And then there's actually this strong Cree communities that live in Scotland.
Okay.
Had
Wow.
no idea.
I didn't know either. I knew that there
Mhm.
was like Indigenous relations there from like different tribal groups and everything that, you know, before it was Scotland. As I learned while I was there and learning about the Pictish people, for instance, and it was really great because they have temples. Like the Pictish had temples, but the temples were all underground,
Oh, wow.
and so they're, you know, mostly all abandoned, and it's kind of sad, you know, to see that there's these, you know, archaic remnants of a culture that's there that's not celebrated or talked about, or, you know, more education put out.
Mhm.
But it was very profound.
Mm, mm. Um, couple of the one of the there are two there are two things I really wanted to explore a little bit in the conversation, and one of them was this the work that you do around care. And so I think innately Indigenous people do think about community and land-based and environmental when they do create the work, like when we do create the work that we create. But there's something really intriguing about when you talk about privacy in public, and especially with the basket weaving that you were doing with that you were working on. And I wanted to hear more about how you started to realize that care is such an important part of your artistic practice, and then how did public and private come into more of the consciousness of the work that you create?
That's a great question, and actually nobody has ever asked that question. Yeah, you know, people will be like, oh wow, you know, that's kind of integral, and they'll ask why, but they won't ask like how did it start or at what point did it start.
Mhm.
And you know, when I was in the Kerner residency at Queen's, I just kind of went nuts looking at like my archive of everything I've done, and just put a bunch of sticky notes. I'm like, okay, these are all collaborative projects. These are all land-based projects. These are performance pieces. These are durational performance pieces. There's a sculpture. So I kind of like, you know, kind of took a deep dive into my work. And then I was looking at how so many of these projects that I've done, that care was always a very common theme through all of them, whether I'm collaborating with people or just working on my own. But it seems to be something that I feel like it kind of started, you know, back when I was a student, where it was a personal experience and looking at the idea of care around culture, around materials, and around the responsibility of public engagement. So I was, you know, this young punk. I had a mohawk, going to the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, had piercings in my face, and I was like, I want to do something totally outside the box. And, you know, I've told this story like a million times, but I went to my great grandmother and I asked her, I said, I want to make a basket, but I want to weave myself into the basket. And, you know, she said, oh, this is going to be a huge basket if you're inside. And I said, yeah, it's going to be pretty big. I said, but I just want to do something, you know, that's really, you know, kind of like cutting edge and like pushing the boundaries. I said, but I also want to make sure that I'm not breaking any protocols. Like, it's really important to me that, you know, is this allowed? Am I allowed to incorporate these materials in performance art? And, you know, we had really great conversations about art and craft and history and the materials. And she really informed me a lot with regards to the responsibility of using those materials, but then also like the cultural significance. And she said, well, we didn't really make ash splint baskets before Europeans arrived. She said, because they're the ones that wanted the ash splint baskets, that we mock them based on their agricultural vessels. And then we adapted them to make them the signature, you know, the Mi'kmaq ash basket. So we talked about economics and commerce and all this stuff. But then she told me, she said, going back to you wanting to make this giant basket, she said, I don't really care what you do. She said, I just am happy that you're using these materials and you're working with this. And so in doing that, you know, that performance that was like initially a 3-day performance, the first day I failed miserably. Everything was falling apart and I didn't know what I was doing. I hadn't made baskets since I was 9. And I was like, what was I thinking? The second day I was like, okay, maybe I can make some progress. But then things started falling apart again. And it was at an Indigenous Arts Festival in Halifax. And there was a couple of Woostaquiak artists that were up top. They were women from the Tobique First Nation in New Brunswick. And they were kind of like laughing and jeering at me. They're like, oh, they're laughing. And I was like, oh, I don't know what to do. And it was such a humbling moment for me. So I like climbed the mezzanine and went up there and I was like, I really need your help. I'm not sure what I'm doing. And, you know, I'm trying to get this done. And they're like, why do you want to do it, kid? And when I explained to them, I said, I feel like I'm having like a bit of an identity crisis. Here I am in this art institution. There's no talk about Indigenous art, Indigenous culture, Indigenous history. I said, and I just wanted to do something to like help me to understand who I am and my historical narrative with materials and processes. And so they're like, okay, we'll come help you. So they helped me and I started making this basket. And as it grew around me, there was almost like this growth that took place and a maturation where I was like, oh, this is what it's about. It's about the exchange and like, you know, needing to be humble to say like, can you help me and let me know if I can do something to help you, and to have that relation and that exchange was really important. And I think it was at that moment where everything just kind of shifted for me, you know, coming out of university. Then I was like, okay, I need to, one, be aware of my materials and the historical references. I also need to be aware of who I'm talking to, because if I'm talking to a group of all Indigenous people, it's going to be different than a group of all settler people. And it's still going to be different if it's Indigenous and settler people, you know, so it's kind of thinking about the care in the dialogue that kind of initially started before actually going into a place of thinking about the care of the body and my collaborators. That was a long answer for your question.
Oh, it's a perfect
I've never had that question before.
It's perfect. It's perfect. I mean, the responsibility of community and I engaging with like knowledge keepers and elders and community members is always such, I think, can be seen as a bit scary, but the love and support that comes from the knowledge that they have, or there's a feeling that maybe they don't understand what you're wanting to do as an artist. I think that that's kind of always it's like, okay, I really want to do this this wild thing, but I need to know how to do the protocol aspect of it. And then they're like, oh yeah, just do this. And I always forget how incredibly intuitive, adaptable, and insightful knowledge keepers and elders are in regards to just the culture itself. And that we sometimes think culture is this, but actually culture is everything. Yeah. Yeah. And then working with non-Indigenous and Indigenous is always interesting too. But I agree that the humbleness is really what allows us to have that interactive engagement to it. And also
and willingness to be vulnerable too.
Yeah, that's the hugest, is that willingness to be vulnerable. And I was like kind of giggling listening to you. Like, I want to build this. I've never made a basket, but I want to build a basket the size of me as like my first project.
Yeah, it's pretty fun.
I witnessed some of your work went back a number of years ago during the Prismatic Festival, and you were doing that basket weaving over a young woman that was like, I think, sitting down in a stool or a chair, and you were really working on that, and we got to witness that
at the law library.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was one of the interventions. That was actually the first performance for that series. That's how that performance series started, because Prismatic had invited me to take part in the festival. And I said, well, where's the festival located? And they said, well, it's going to be all over the city. But the talk, because Prismatic, as you know, as being somebody who's taken part, you know, one part is the festival and the performances, but then the other part is the really like deep talk and the engagement between artists, between arts administrators, you know, arts funders, gatekeepers. All of those conversations directly inform everybody's practices, but often festivals don't make space for that conversation. So that was kind of how Prismatic differed. So I said, well, where's the talk? And they said the talk is going to be hosted at the Schulich School of Law. And I was like, okay, so I'll think about that a bit and see, what my response would be. And I went and visited the law school and walked around and saw the library and looked, and there was like some busts, of like famous like heroes, historical figures. And I was like, ooh, I know what I want to make. I want to make busts of famous historical figures that have made change and will continue to make change. But I want to take it so that it's this shell of like an exoskeleton that comes off to kind of shed that, the colonial implications of the Indian Act and like the membership enrollment process with the Indian Act. But to engage in those conversations as the intervention in front of the law library, where, the former judges and lawyers of Canada were walking into to study, and they would come across this person having their head wrapped, and they're like, what is this?
Mm-hmm.
So that's great that you were able to see that. That was the baby. That was the first one.
It was pretty prolific.
4 hours. Now it's 45 minutes to get one done.
Incredible.
Maybe I can do yours someday.
Oh my goodness. I would be so honored. And just like, I just remember it coming off of her and just having like having this look on her face, like just that feeling of that she had gone through something with you. And then that's so, when you talk about vulnerability and you talk about like that in that public and private, it's like, oh my goodness.
Yeah. And I'm very protective of that space too. Like when they come out, then I like jump in and I'm like, as soon as you come out, I'm going to whisk you away and we're going to have our chat, because I know that people are, coming out of something. And then there's a bunch of spectators, and I don't want them to consume this individual who's come out of this vulnerability.
Yeah. And this performance arc that you create, I always ask people who are connected to community, what inspired you to become an artist? Because oftentimes, like, I'm one of the first artists in our family, and coming out of situations and coming from like isolated communities. And so what really kind of, and performance art is a very specific practice that, doesn't come out of nowhere. So
yeah, right. Well, I was fortunate enough to grow up in a family of artists. There's so many artists in my family that are visual artists, but also work in film and television and music. So there's, there was always a vibe of creativity around in my family growing up. And so that was, it was nurtured in me as a child, and it was just kind of grew. But while I was in high school, I actually was really drawn into theater. And so initially I went into theater, started university in theater, in production. And then there was some family circumstances that happened, and I had to take some time off university. And then when I decided to go back into university, I ended up basically switching sides, and I left the theater world and moved into visual arts, because then I went into NASCAD. And it was while I was at NASCAD, that I was exposed to this entire world of different art forms that I'd never really understood and may have like heard about. And so a lot of my classes, one of the first classes that I went to, which is actually the class where I met my wife, we were in class together, and it was called Performance and Movement. And so in that class, learning about all of these different Canadian and American and international artists that worked specifically in performance, I was like, this is my jam. I'm like, these are my people. This is what I want to do. I understand this. I think also because coming out of the, performing arts background, and then to be into visual arts, I'm like, I'm not a painter. I can't draw perspective. I don't understand the color wheel. So I was kind of intimidated. But then when I got introduced into performance art, I was like, I get this. I know what this is about. And then so I just kind of, from that point on, anytime there was an opportunity to take classes that had to do with performance or installation, then I just kind of like pinpointed on all of those.
Incredible.
It fit well with understanding, you know, the creating a scene and designing it. And then it's like trying to create a narrative and an emotional connection and a response. And really, it spoke to me. You know, I didn't know how painters do it. I'm like, I can't do that.
I know, it's pretty incredible. I've done one performance art piece called Anticipation, which was like waiting for whale. And I worked with a performance artist that kind of helped me deconstruct theater, because I feel like it is a bit of a deconstruction of theater, where theaters, you build the world and then you recreate the world and you perfect the recreation of the world every time you do it. But performance art is about being alive and responsive to the impulse, the spontaneity, and the interaction of the materials themselves. I felt, I'm not an expert by any means, but I felt like you had to go outside of the world to be in that kind of unpredictability of it. So yeah, I felt performance art, when you talk about vulnerability, like has a lot of vulnerability to it.
Yeah. And it's extremely visceral, like not just to the body, but like all of the senses and everything. And I really enjoy that visceral feeling within performance and like the real time component of it. So much so that when I was a student, you know, I was so like hyper focused on like the conceptual component of performance art, where I was like, I'm not documenting anything because you have to be there and you have to experience it like in the real. So I ended up doing all kinds of performances, you know, early in school and just coming out of school, but they're never documented. So then they don't really exist except in the memories of people that were there, which is in some ways extremely beautiful.
Yeah.
But then in other ways, it's like, well, I can't really talk about that work because I don't even have any like reference material.
Yeah, context to it. Well, other than just what you were feeling within that moment. The when you talked about durational, like your durational performance that you did in response to all the like the marking of colonizations, your anti-colonization piece, what is that durational aspect to it? Like how do you know the length of a piece? How do you know the impact of it? How do you, like, you know, for the gymnastics element, like you talked about how you prepped for that, like what is that process for you?
I think it changes every time. Like there's some times where I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this piece for like 6 hours and I know I want to do it for 6 hours, but you know, and a part of it will be, part of the things I like about, you know, kind of that visual component is like pushing your body, your mind, like to the limits to see how far you can get. And then you get to a certain point where it's like, I can't do this anymore. I have like an hour and a half left and I feel like I'm just going to drop. But then there's something like inside of me that kicks in and it's like, no, you got this, you can do it. And then I'm like, okay, I just got to dig deep and like continue on. And then so there's some of those works where I set a time and then I just go. And then others where it's like more organic and it's like, okay, let's just see how long this project can go. Or I design something out and basically rough it out. So like, for instance, the Elmiet, which was one of the first performances I did for Prismatic, where I was, you know, had offered to have the last Indian scalped in Halifax. And so that I knew, I was like, okay, so it's going to be about 6 hours. I'm going to stop here. I'm going to stop here. I'm going to stop here. So I kind of roughed it out. But as far as like time was concerned, I didn't really, I didn't practice the walk or anything because I just wanted to make sure I was right in the moment and not rehearsing it. And I ended up coming like an hour, almost like an hour and a half before my time I was supposed to be there. And I was like, now what do I do? I'm like an hour and a half early before my mark when, you know, the entire crowd of people arrives to meet me for this grand finale of the scalping. And then I was like, well, maybe we just like go and like hide. So because I had a bunch of like parkourists that were with me and I was like, was like, man, rookie move. Like you didn't time this out, right? But anyways, it all worked out in the end. But then for like the Viva Festival, that work, and I had neglected to mention the name of the work actually, which is called Wen Begisink, which means in Mi'kmaq, who's here? You know, that's what you see when you hear. You're like, Wen Begisink, because nobody who's from family or community knocks, right? So when there's a knock, it's like, uh-oh, who's here? So I was kind of, you know, when I was working on that piece and training for it, I wasn't sure exactly how long I wanted it to be. I just knew I had these 5 moves that I had choreographed and, you know, kind of worked my way around it. But then once I started to work on the musical composition, which was in my residency at Oboro that I worked on, then the entire score, once I had finished it, ended up being 43 minutes. And then I was like, okay, so the performance is 43 minutes. But very obviously, I'm not a gymnast and I can't be on the rings for 43 minutes. So that I had to plan in all of the different other components of going in. And I want to give a shout out to Dr. Willie Franco, who's actually, I noticed in the chat here and sent an email. Thank you so much, Willie. But I had done a Buto workshop with Willie when I was in Banff. And then I was like, oh, if I want to make time move fast, very slow with my body, then I'm just going to embody that, you know, kind of stretching that time span out. So I started the performance by leaving these doors, and it took me, and you would be proud of me, Willie, it took me about 27 minutes to walk 14 feet. And then so once I arrived, but it was like this crowd of people. And so as soon as the sound started, then I started my movement. And then as people were like, you know, chatting away and they're wearing these suits and everything. And then somebody realizes that I was entering in like in this like super slow speed. Then everybody was like, oh my God, she's coming, it's starting. Then everybody just took their seats and then watched, you know, kind of the progression of it. So kind of working in different elements and really kind of plan that out. But sometimes I have a set time, other times it happens really organically. And sometimes I get extremely ambitious and I'm like, I'm going to do a 14-hour performance. And then at like hour 12, my body starts giving up and, you know, my quads are shaking and my knees are like, why did you decide to do this for 14 hours? We can only do 12 because you're about to collapse. And so, you know, that lasted 12 hours.
Incredible. Yes. One question that we had yesterday in the chat was, I'm curious how Ursula decides how much basketry to weave for each sitter, and does it depend on the conversation flow?
That's a good question. No, not really. I just prepare enough materials as if I was going to weave like right up to their waistline. And then I have them all ready. And then when we get started, it's based on, you know, kind of the synergy in the relationship of working with these people in their bodies and seeing like, you know, if somebody's like tired of sitting for a period of time and I'm like, how are you feeling? And they're like, oh, you know, my back is getting a little bit sore. I'm like, do you want me to finish soon or you want to keep going? So it's just kind of all dependent on that.
So it's a back and forth in that process conversation.
Yeah.
And do you harvest the materials too beforehand?
I have harvested when I work with different materials, but those materials for that project, because as I think I had mentioned, I'm an apprentice. I definitely wouldn't consider myself like a basket maker proper. I'm an apprentice, so I can split the ash to a certain extent, but the materials that I need are like paper thin. So I actually have a Mi'kmaq elder in the Gaspé who is like a master. He's the master of his craft and one of the few people who actually knows exactly how to work with, you know, all of the materials and understands those materials. And so he helps me, and his name is Stephen Jerome, and you can see he's got all kinds of documentaries out there that he talks about, you know, keeping the traditions alive of harvesting ash. And
Yeah, up north we work with spruce root, and so and when you think about like the resurgence of basketry and how we connect with that, my mom, she noticed in like these old pictures that they were our pots and pans. So the babiche bag was our suitcases, and then spruce root baskets were our pots and pans, and they would be water sealant, and then you would put hot rocks inside of them, and they would boil, and that's how we prepared our food. And because none of them existed, and she wasn't able to see a living example of it, she brought over a woman from BC that did it with cedar root, a very similar technique. And so they made all these baskets that were like this big. And then when she went to Ottawa and went to the Museum of Civilization, which is called something different now, she realized that they were like just like this big. So like she had made like these giant baskets when they were just like tiny little baskets. And so that resurgence of finding those and what that is kind of fun.
But it's interesting because maybe those tiny ones were like trade commodity, you know, and not necessarily functional vessels. They could have been based on functional vessels.
Absolutely.
That's what I found a lot, you know, in looking at the history of Mi'kmaq basketry, that the baskets that were made were like big and kind of plain because they were the functional ones. And then all of a sudden there's these little tiny, like highly decorative ones, which are trade commodity.
Amazing. Never even thought about that, you know. Mention that. One of the questions we had yesterday as well was, how do you cope with the exhaustion? So of course, like that public element of performance, and then the private in that. So one, the duration of it, and then what is the recovery period to these pieces and these works?
Well, that's a great question. Whoever put that in there yesterday. I think it really varies. It really depends on like the amount of like physical exertion that I have to put in, and then like the recovery time. Like there's some where it's just like total bounce back. Like I remember doing the When Big Sink performance, you know, there wasn't a whole lot of downtime because it was in the festival context where, you know, I'm finished and Johanna Householder was the next one to come on, right? Like moments after I was done. And it's like, okay, I gotta wash all this red off me and like try to brush out my hair because I have 14 minutes. And then so it's like, then now I'm a part of the audience. And then so there's really like no time to like run off and kind of figure stuff out. I did go outside to just kind of like ground out. And then it's like, now I'm going to come in and witness this amazing performance. So there's sometimes, and then when I went home and had like a proper shower, then I was like so exhilarated. I was like, oh, I'm ready to go. And I don't remember like being terribly sore for that one, but I think it was because I had trained so hard for those particular types of movements. But then there's other ones I've done where I'm weaving the basket around myself. And, you know, it's just like standing, but I'm like bending at the waist constantly. Then I was like, oh, my back is going to be sore tomorrow. But it actually ended up being my quads and my hamstrings that were killing me because I didn't realize how much I was exerting in that motion. And so the second time I think I had done that piece was on Manitoulin Island. It was for Debajmajik for their 6 Foot Festival. And it was on the Georgian Bay shore there. And that was one that I had set to be like the 14-hour, but I could only do like 12. And then I was like gone. And I did collapse and my legs just gave out, you know, once I was finished and kind of emerged from this vessel. And I was in pretty rough shape for about like 3 or 4 days. So I think it's part of it is like, you know, situational, dependent on how you're exerting your body, but also like the care leading up to it and then the care afterwards. It's not something I've really considered a whole lot. And I remember, I think it was coming from maybe like Saskatoon for there was a conference. What was the name of the conference now? I can't remember the name of the conference that we were coming from, but there was a whole bunch of artists that were there. And I happened to be sharing the row with Rebecca Belmore, and Rebecca and I were talking about, performance art and how taxing it is on the body. And she looked at me and she said, "You're young." She said, "And I don't really like give advice, but I'm going to tell you something. You really need to be aware of like your body." She said, "Because this is your art material." She said, "Just like a painter takes really great care of their brushes," she said, "this is your brush. So make sure you," and I was like, I'm going to put that right here and really like make sure that I do what you're telling me, as somebody who, I greatly admire and have seen her do all kinds of performances that you're like, whoa, that was intense, and I'm sure it's very extremely taxing on her body, and for her to pass on, that information of like, make sure you take care of your brushes.
Yeah, it's true. I know theater's the same thing. It's like, this is your body and this is your art. And, it can, it peaks and it valleys for sure, which is kind of a beautiful gift in itself to be aware of.
Yeah.
This is it's about it's another question we received yesterday about, and it's, I think, connected to a land-based practice. And so as an Indigenous woman and a performance artist, and with connection to land, time, and space, how do you go about engaging to that work? So it says, do you wait until you arrive to the location to create? Like, how do you kind of plan your engagements?
Yeah, it's definitely has changed through the years. Where in the very beginning, when I was doing these land-based works or site-specific, I would make something based on like research from away. And then there came a point in time where I was like, okay, I really need to be there, and I need to smell everything, and I didn't hear the environment. And so once I kind of started to make that shift of like, okay, if I'm going to make something that's new, that's responsive, then I need to be there and to see that. And so that's just kind of how I've progressed now, where anytime I'm working on something, it's extremely important to have a site visit, and even sometimes repeat site visits, to have dialogue and conversations, instead of just like, hey, you want to do this and let's work together. And it's like, okay, great. We'll have like a phone chat and a couple of emails, and then that's it. But since like changing my process now, where it's like more like delving in and really focusing on like all of the other components that I won't necessarily be able to research, like the smell of an area, for instance, it's like, it's really intense. Like if you're doing a performance somewhere outdoors and you had never been there before, and you arrive and you're like, whoa, like what is that smell? That's crazy. And that happened when I went to California, and it was at the Idlewild Arts Center in the mountains. And I arrived there and it just smelled like caramel, like everywhere. And I was like, why does it smell like caramel? Like, is there a factory or something? And one of the women that worked there, she said, no, it's the trees. And I said, the trees, like, why do they smell like caramel? She said, some days they smell like vanilla, some days they smell like caramel. She said, but she was talking about, it was like a certain type of pine. I can't remember the kind of pine, but the bark of the tree actually has chemicals in it where it makes the tree shed its bark. But the chemicals that are in that bark that smell like caramel is actually almost like a natural fire retardant that has like evolved over time, because those forests are so prone to fires, that the trees have like learned how to create this reaction to protect themselves and to protect the forest. And that just like blew my mind. And I never would have known had I not been there and had that smell.
Oh, wow. And we think about, how is this, so when it comes to, because we are, we're still in pandemic times, we're still figuring out how to create art either remotely, we're still figuring out how to do collaborations. How has this time impacted your creative work?
It's been hard. It's been like hard AF. It's really, I was like, I'm not going to lie. It's been extremely difficult because as a performance artist, it's about my body and it's about other bodies in space together and to be in that relationship. And that's something like I'm sitting here, across from you that it looks like I'm making eye contact, but I'm staring into a camera. And then I try to look at you, but then I'm looking down here at like the monitor. And so it's like, I'm like, what is even happening here? There was a period of time when people were doing Zoom performances and video performances and stuff like that. And I was like, it's great when people are comfortable to do that. But for me, I need to be in an environment with people in those bodies and having that exchange and relationship. I'm just in a room by myself with a camera if I'm not having that space. And there is a lot of performance artists that do performance for camera. And that's a completely different, as far as I'm concerned, like a whole different canon of performance art. That's very different. Just like there's theater performances and music performances that are for camera. Those are productions of different events and happenings. But to be in the space is something that I've really missed. And I've had the opportunity to talk with other performance artists. And we've talked about how, the pandemic has been extremely hard on everybody, but it's been, even in my opinion, and the other people I've talked to, even more difficult on performance artists and performing art, because we need those spaces and those bodies and, the breath together and hearts, kind of pumping, because we know scientifically that if there's an auditorium or a theater full of people, that it just takes a short amount of time before everybody's like breath and their heartbeats actually become in sync. And that is not the type of magic you can make happen on Zoom.
No.
Sorry, Zoom. No offense.
No, but it has allowed, in this world, it has allowed more accessibility. So, there's a better sense of accessibility, a better sense of connectability. But I always feel like we have these conversations with the hopes that we get to share space, like actual space with one another. And so what is it to you create art for now to know that later on you'll experience that art live? Technically I'm on holidays right now from Banff Centre, so I could direct theater, because I was like, but theater is not work right now. Like, theater is feeding my soul because I get to be in a room with artists, because I get to see them creating work and putting ideas together and memorizing their lines and their blocking. And I feel like it's a gift right now to be able to be in those spaces and to breathe that space. So yeah, I'm really understanding that.
Absolutely. And I feel like it's also, it's renewed my sense of gratitude for that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I agree. So this is in response to returning back. And so given the need to travel as a performance artist, how do you connect back to home? What does it feel like to engage in foreign spaces, your body, I think in reference to your site-specific work that you've done, and then without it contaminating or invading it? So these are like two questions. Right. What is it like to return home with new experiences that you've had with land-based practice and site-specific work? And then I'll follow up later with, to go into spaces, does it feel like you're contaminating or invading it, or what is that relational connection?
Yeah. For me, I feel like whenever I'm away and I come back home, it's almost like this, it's like a sense of responsibility for carrying information of like, historically that messenger that like goes out to find something and comes back and it's like, oh, this is what's out there, this is what I've learned. So it's almost like, I'm bringing a narrative home, and anytime I have an opportunity to share that narrative and those stories and talk to students and community members, whoever it is, it's something that really fills me up to be able to share all of that. And I think when I'm away, it's definitely, the heartstrings are connected to home. And, I was in Sydney for Abaquad just when the pandemic was declared. And so we're all in Australia, and I was doing a performance there. And just to kind of like ground myself out, I like took my braids out and put my hair out, and I was like, okay, I need all my neural network to like go out there and like reach home, because I'm so far from home. And then when I started my performance, I was singing, and the song that I was singing was like a coming home song. But it was a coming home song for these these Mi'kmaq clothing that are in the museum in Australia and have been there for an extremely long time. So I was like singing to these clothes to let them know that they will be coming home, so it's kind of, even though it's like way at the other end of the world, it was very much like, I'm Mi'kmaq, I'm using my Mi'kmaq language, my body, my voice, my neural network, anything I can do within all of me to connect me to home, and then to like tie in all of that stuff as well. So I don't know if that kind of answers the first part. And then the second part about the idea of like, the invading or the contaminating, there's a practice that I have developed quite early on, like soon after I came out of university, when I would be invited or go to visit different territories where, I would contact whoever it is that I'm working with and ask them, can you please put me in contact with somebody from the community, either with like the Friendship Center or a community center or even the school, so that I can have that initial contact. And then I ask what all the protocols are. I'm like, what are the protocols for me as a Mi'kmaq woman to come with my Mi'kmaq language, my thoughts, my philosophies, my values, ideas onto your territory, so that I do it in a respectful way. So that's something that is a very important practice to me. And it's not, it's not a public practice or anything. It's just out of respect, because that's, I think, what should be what people should be doing. So that's what I do. But with regards to like contaminating spaces within like the arena of like performing or exhibiting works, after I've gone through the necessary protocols that I need to do to make sure that I'm not being disrespectful, then from that point on, I'm like, well, I'm just going to do what I do, which is to try to, not necessarily try to create anything like controversial, but to look at things through like a bit of a critical lens, where it's like, okay, let's try to, twist this up a little bit and shake it up and see where we can take this notion of like discomfort and really kind of amp it up a little bit to the point where it's like, oh, I don't know if I want to be here or experience this, or to have people thinking that, but then to try to make it so that it's comfortable enough where people feel comfortable in being discomforted, and then to try to figure out, okay, what is happening here? Why am I, staring at this man dancing in the window, taking pictures of him, when the music is actually telling me, go ahead and look at me, because that's what I want. I take a good look, won't you please, because that's what I want. I know you want to stare, you can't help it, I don't care, take a picture, please. So it's like this pop song is playing on loudspeakers, telling people what to do. And they're like recording this guy dancing in the window. And then all of a sudden they're like, wait, am I just doing what this music is telling me to do? And then it's really great to see people automatically, they just go into like consumption mode. And, it's in a night festival format. So of course, people have like 10 seconds to get the attention, and then they move on. But then they're like, oh my God, the music's great. Look at this beautiful powwow dancer. And then they're like taking a video, and then it's like, oh my God, I just clued into what the music was saying, and I'm doing exactly what the music is saying. So it's kind of really interesting to see people have that moment where they're like, uh-oh, this is like really strange, and I don't know if I should be here or what I should be doing. And I think that's why it was important to me to implement like safe zones within spaces of what I'm working on, so that people can, accidentally find it.
It's pretty incredible. Like even just with the one where you had them wearing the hazmat suits and that you were projecting on them, is that the audience is consenting by you creating that safe space, they're consenting to engage in the work itself, and that so that they're not always being a spectator to the work, but they themselves are taking part in it, and then walking away with that perspective of witnessing, but also in being engaged with it, and how that must be, that's incredible.
Yeah, I like to consider myself a bit of a trickster in that way.
It is a little bit like that. They're like, I'm coming to this performance. Wait, I gotta put on a hazmat suit. Wait, now I got questions on me. Oh, I love it. I love it. I'm just thinking about the idea of like land and space, and so we always want to leave the place how we've left it. I always say that's some of the greatest teachings that I've received is that you can do all the work that you create, but you've done good work when you can't see where it's been left the same way that it's been found. And I think when you create a safe space, that's kind of a similar practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sometimes even like creating like a very comfortable and safe space, you can incorporate things that create that discomfort, and like kind of flip on those light switches of like, what am I experiencing here? And I feel like that's kind of what's happening with this current exhibition I have on the living room, where people approach this giant box, and as they kind of come around the end, they see a big sign that says full immersive sensory installation, that there may be strobing effect at times, no cameras, and people are like, oh, I don't know if I want to go in there. And then they walk in, and all of a sudden they're in somebody's home in the middle of the night, and they've like, what? Wait, what's going on here? But then once you get through the initial shock of realizing that you're an intruder in this person's home, then you start looking at like all of the paraphernalia in their home. And there's like, there's a commemorative plate of the Pope, which became extremely loaded, like halfway through the installation because of everything that was happening. But that Pope was a part of the design of that installation before all of the findings about the graveyards and everything. There's like a picture of the Queen from her 1987 Jubilee. That's a very loaded. There's like giant like taxidermy in there. This space that's loaded, and all of those little, the little Indian dolls from Montreal that are like brown and covered in buckskin. People walk in and they're like, oh, I can't believe this is in this space. This is horrible, and this is this, and so it's like all these signifiers that people walk in, and it's this cozy, comfortable, homey living room that everybody has been in at some point in time, till you start like snooping in the living room, and then it's like, whoa. And then you have the Shopping Network video playing at you, with all these with Heidi and her co-hosts and everything. So it's like it's ultimate like comfort and discomfort just like mashed up into one.
Yeah, that's what. Thank you for the reminder. And I think Janine has just shared links to the exhibition as well, which is pretty incredible. It kind of read to me like an Inuit art, like Annie Patukuk. Like she did that beautiful 2-dimensional like living room kind of art that really does resonate. And so when you walk into a home, like it has that. It just has that like immediate sense of comfort. Like there's a definitely like a recognition of like, I've been in these homes. I've been in so many people's living room that look like this. And also, which is kind of strange, is that Indigenous people love the Pope. They do, and they follow. Like I have a lot of cousins and aunties that have met the Pope, that there's the papal site in Fort Simpson that recognizes when the Pope visited there, the Queen had been there. Like there's lots of recognition of I think it's our aunties. Like it's not so much like I've never been like a Pope and royal family fan, but my aunties definitely have been. So I wonder if it's like that generational thing too, and being raised in those homes that that have those images in there.
And especially that particular Pope, because that plate is John Paul II, and we all know he was essentially like a pop cultural icon in the 80s, right? He was the people's Pope. He was the first one to like leave the Vatican and like tour and meet people and like shake hands, and so it was like a whole a symbol that like shifted that relationship, and a lot of Indigenous peoples who many across this country are Christian, so they're definite like ties to the church, but then in particular that Pope who's like that's the one, and then all the other ones are, everyone's like, oh yeah, I think I remember that one, but the other one is like, oh, I know who that is.
It's true. We're just getting a little reminder. We've been doing very good. This was an incredible time together. So we have a couple minutes left. But I want to hear a little bit more about your work, just to kind of, you called it a shameless plug yesterday, but it's really not. It's you talking about your practice now. And so it'd be nice to hear more about it and how we can learn more about it, possibly see it. What is its future plans?
So the Indian Truckhouse of High Art, the living room that we have now, is it has been designed to be basically a giant crate that you open, and then the living room like pops out of it. So with the intention that it will fold up and then move out and around and visit different places. And so we're really excited about that project. And I am super excited about it because I've never, as I've been moving into more sculptural works, I just wanted, because, working in the art world and museums and galleries, there's crates that are, very functional, and you ship all of the work in it. But then these giant crates are taking up all this space and in the way. And it's like, okay, we can put them in storage, we can do this. And then I was like, oh, what if the crates were like the actual sculpture? And then everything just goes inside the crates as it like travels around. So it was kind of like, kind of nerding out on like the tech and the prep part of it all. It was like, oh yeah, this is gonna be so exciting. But to kind of looking at that series of, the Indian Truckhouse of High Art started as like a performance intervention in 2011, or I think, can't remember the exact dates, 2010 or 2011. And then from that, it turned into this video production and at Banff. And then from the video production at Banff into this retail store. And then from the retail store on the way back home, I was like, well, who's shopping, from the television network? And then now we're diving into these people's homes to see like who is shopping from these television networks. So I feel like now that it has to go somewhere else, but I can't tell you where it's going to go because I need to keep that to myself. Yeah. But the living room will be making its rounds, and people will see it and come and cozy up in there.
Amazing. And I had one last question, which does can you still order from the shopping network?
Oh, you can always order from the shopping network. There's a number of pieces still available with the Central Art Garage that has some stuff from the retail store. And there's also going to be, because the Blue Building Gallery is a commercial gallery, so there'll be works available from this particular installation through the Blue Building Gallery. And I think Janine just threw the link on there to the website, so you can find stuff like that. Yeah. But the little kitschy items from the shopping network, Central Art Garage has those items from the retail store.
So you can wear your authentic howling wolf shirt.
Yeah, your power animal shirt.
Well, this was incredible, and I'm just so appreciative, and thank you for taking the time to spend this Sunday with me and chat about your work as an artist and how inspiring and incredible it is.
Oh, stop. But don't stop. Thank you, Renalta. It's truly been an honor. I'm so honored to be able to take part in this conversation series with you. Thank you so much.
Me too. Masih Kuyanik and Wilalin.